Is your team not performing well? Is morale low and turnover high? Are you falling further behind the competition? I'm here to help. I'm Shani Magoski, and this is the Leadershifter Show, where business strategy and culture finally meet. Explore shifts of all kinds required to build cultures of trust, engagement, and execution excellence. I promise I am not your typical boring leadership consultant, and I will help you and your team get your shift together. All right, we are live. Welcome, Dr. Brad Harris, to the Leadershifter Show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Thrilled to be here today.
Excellent. Well, I'm thrilled to have you. Leadershifters, we've got a very esteemed professor of management and human resources at HEC Paris. But as you've already noticed, he does not have a French accent. He is originally from Texas and has relocated to Paris post-pandemic for this professorship role and, just to shake it up a little bit. And as a Francophile and lover of Paris, I am jealous. And it takes a lot for me to be jealous, especially in December when I sit here in Fort Lauderdale having the best weather probably in the entire country.
Yeah. Well, look, you've got us beat on the weather today. I'm sure it's gray and it's cold outside, but you do have a little bit of reason to be jealous. My wife and I went to lunch at one of these cafes that are everywhere and really did the French thing today. And I got to tell you, it's great. It's great.
Oh my God. I've been to Paris 7 times and, I'll probably be there 7 more in my lifetime.
Yeah, well, it's a beautiful city. There's a cool vibe about it. So, yeah, I get
Absolutely. It. Well, tell us, how did you get the professorship in Paris? Was it something you went after intentionally? Did they headhunt you? Give us that story.
Well, yeah, maybe it was mostly me poking my head up after the pandemic and asking, is there something more out there that I would like to try? I've got 3 kids that are still young enough that we thought we could get away with a move and still get back if we needed to before they enter some really critical transition phases in their educational lives. So we were in Fort Worth, Texas before we moved to Paris, and it was great. I worked at Texas Christian University, go Frogs, and
TCU, they're in the national championship.
Yeah. I'm a little bit disappointed that I missed sort of the meteoric rise of Sonny Dykes and the football program, but we still cheer them on from afar. We watch them every weekend. But Fort Worth was great. My colleagues at TCU were some of the smartest people I've ever met. I certainly enjoyed working with students, and we really just wanted to try to expand our own horizons. And what better place to do that than Paris, I guess.
Absolutely. Well, congratulations to you and the family.
Thank you
for having the courage and the creativity to shift your life to Paris, at least for now.
Yeah. And before we let that point go, there's something pretty significant about the way you're phrasing that mirrors reality for us. And I've been teaching leadership for over a decade to both undergrads, MBAs, EMBAs, and then I also work with a group called People Leader Accelerator. We've now had about 3 dozen chief people officers at high growth companies come through the program. And look, there's a weird thing that happens when you talk about growth and courage and being bold, that if you talk about it enough, eventually you start looking at your own life and you start thinking, maybe I should be a little bit bolder in some of my choices and try some new things too. So yeah, totally. This is a shift, not just geographically, but it's a shift in my own leadership journey, I hope.
Oh, absolutely. I appreciate you saying that, because one of the things I'm sure you also see out there is a little bit of leaders not walking their own talk. And so, it's easy to preach to those in the organization, we should do this, we should do that. And then they don't do it themselves. So it's good to be in integrity when it comes to matching your actions and your words.
Absolutely. And I empathize with leaders. Like, it sounds really simple to say you got to walk the walk in addition to talking the talk. But when you're busy and the world is so uncertain, this gets tricky, and you make a lot of assumptions about, the people underneath me. They know who I'm about. I don't have to do all the things, but not the case. We cast a long shadow as leaders, and people are watching all the time. And one of the things that we do in People Leader Accelerator, but also in my consulting and in my classes, is we try to steer leaders away from talking about big, broad values. I mean, that's part of the equation that we're doing. We do this exercise of, what are your company's values? What are your personal values? But then we pretty quickly move on to, values are just things that you put on the wall if you're not, walking the walk, as you said.
Yeah.
So part of the shift is, let's take these values and let's outline behaviors that we can do on a daily, a weekly, monthly basis that really show how those values are real.
Absolutely. Well, aligned here, because that was one of my next questions, because I knew values is something that you focus on, as do I. When I start any executive leadership development, coaching engagement, it's one of the very first things we do is talk about their personal values, and then how they relate to organizational values and all that. And when I'm working with leadership teams, either doing team coaching or leadership development facilitation, is talking, like re-examining their values and how long ago were these things made, and are they still relevant, and are they just words on a conference room wall that either no longer resonate or never did, and let's fix that before we do anything else.
Yeah, and you also have the problem of, like, a lot of us pick platitudes. Like you can even think of things like integrity, and integrity is certainly important. We kind of made some comments about that earlier, but tell me the organization that's anti-integrity. So part of the challenge also, yeah, I mean, they exist for sure, but you don't see this on the conference room wall and on the front door. Yeah, actually, there's a lot that are probably anti-integrity, but they probably didn't set out to say that out loud.
Right.
So
that's right.
Like a big challenge is thinking about what are the table stakes in terms of values that you have, like what are the non-negotiables. But then really where the magic happens, I think, or at least a big part of the magic in making your organizational culture shine and stand out and contribute to your employee value proposition and all of these things, is what are the values that really make you different? Like what are the 3 or 4, maybe 5 max things that really set you apart? So yeah, let's keep the integrity, but let's really know the 3, 4, 5 things that allow people to see how are we different.
Yep. And can you give us some examples of values that you've helped organizations, or maybe even one of those 3 CPOs, without giving away any confidentiality, that you've helped them shift to from the old ones?
Yeah, I think the most common thing is these platitudes that I kind of referred to before, like integrity, authenticity, these things that I guess they are meaningful, but they're a little bit difficult to see, like how the behaviors line up for them. One really simple one that was important to a founder that I worked with, and it's important to him personally, but also it's something he really wants to see in his company, which is now 25 employees, and he's trying to go to 50, is this idea of we're going to be a gratitude-filled organization. And when he said this, I was like, okay. Now I'm a professor, so like part of my job is questioning assumptions and being a little bit skeptical, borderline cynical on some things. So I was like, what is gratitude-filled organization? Is he real about this, or did he just think that sounded good? But he was pretty real on it, and we came out together, and we, like, one of the most simple things that we did as part of that program was we said, when you're dealing with customers, other employees, whatever, we always say thank you in this. And, that's a little thing, but that is a great representation and reminder of this value of, being a gratitude-filled organization. So it's quite, I don't say it's easy, but sometimes it's quite simple to think of ways to live out your values.
100%. Along those same lines, I'm working with an organization right now, and one of their values that they proclaim is, or that they'd like to emphasize more, live into more, is around being people developers, so that people feel challenged and stretched, and that they see a career path, and then don't leave to go somewhere else. And one of the simple things we're putting into place is mandatory professional development plans, which seems like, well, duh, why isn't that happening? But it wasn't happening.
Oh yeah. I've worked with companies that have similar growth-minded aspirations, values, or whatever we want to call it, and I love it. Like, that's career growth is one of the biggest drivers of employee retention, and on the flip side, one of the biggest drivers of employee turnover. We know this. Sometimes it's even once you're past a certain threshold anyway, even more important than employee compensation and benefits, and explaining what makes people stay and what makes people leave.
Yep.
But things get hectic pretty fast. We're currently in a macro environment where a lot of people are using the R word. They're talking about recession and these sorts of things.
Recession, restructuring, yeah.
All the things. And when
Right.
when it hits the fan like that, one of the first things we do is we stop investing in growth. When our managers get spread too thin, or they don't know what to do, perhaps they're not trained, we stop doing one-on-one regimens, which in some cases is just as effective for helping people grow and set goals that are development minded than formal programs. And all of a sudden we look and we're 6 months down and we haven't done anything related to growth for our employees, despite having this really legitimate interest at one point in making this a priority. So yeah, I get it.
Yes. Oh, that is such a hot button for me as well. Back after the 08, 09 recession, from the bursting of the housing bubble, I'm sure you saw the same thing with cost cutting. One of the first things to get scrapped was professional development, not just at the individual contributor level, but up at, the leadership levels, partially because of cost cutting and somewhat because, compliance training had to be more buttoned up and all those things. And I think we're seeing the ramifications of that now with this gap in succession planning, qualifications, because there was a whole, I wouldn't say a whole generation, but a significant span of years where people were not getting developed. And boy, what a long-term stupid strategy.
Yeah, it's tough. One of my areas of specialty, one of the places I enjoy working with most is human resources, and that those folks are in a tough spot. One, it's really hard to tie clear short-term ROI to some of our learning and development goals, and it's tough to measure learning in general. I work in higher ed. We have grades, we look at career placement, but I don't know that we have a terrific measure for learning in a lot of these fields like leadership, organizational behavior, and so on, where there's complexity and ambiguity. But a lot of the people that design and invest in L&D, they go through this paradoxical thing where when times are tough for organizations and we realize we have a gap in skills or development or succession planning or whatever it is, we always look to the HR department and think what have you been doing? Why can't you fix this? But
it's
when things
maybe because you jerks haven't given me budget in 5 years.
Well, and that's where I'm going with this. And when things are going well, we do this weird counterintuitive thing. We're like, I don't really think HR is adding value right now. The market's good. We don't. What are they doing? So it's a classic. It's beyond HR. It's a classic change problem that we typically don't need. We're not really compelled to change until things go wrong for us, which is unfortunate because that's also when money dries up, when time gets tight, when no one wants to work for us. And when things are going well, we have all those things. We have resources, time, talent, energy, all of these things, but we don't really see a need to change. So,
right.
Yeah, I'm dancing around it, but it's tough. It's a delicate balance. But if you believe in learning, development, growth, you better be investing in it.
Absolutely. Which let me take one of my famous times out to get on my soapbox and address the listeners.
Great. Look forward to it.
Watching right now, which is don't do that. Right? Do you find yourself when times are good, not giving credit to the rising tides lift all ships and keep the focus on your own business? And when times are good, invest even more in professional and leadership development, and do not cut it when times are bad, because it is, as I mentioned earlier, like the stupid long-term strategy. And and something you said earlier, I want to re-emphasize, which is don't, oh yeah, I know you're busy trying to figure out how to boost revenue in a recession and where to cut costs to make sure you're making your earnings and stuff like that. But don't do that at the expense of spending time with your people. Those one-on-ones become even more critical. Coaching your people becomes even more important to get the input from the people who are actually on the ground doing shit. So,
Yeah. You're right.
Which actually reminds me of another value that I love from organizations that aren't afraid to just put it out there. The no assholes rule.
Yeah. I'm a huge fan of Bob Sutton, and he's the guy that kind of had the no asshole rule and the asshole survival guide, and this is his shtick. And I've always enjoyed that work and think there's a lot of value in it. And it's really clear. Like we can see that. We can see that, wow, you're in violation of that rule or that principle that we have. And so that's good.
And, before we leave this topic, because I actually want to pivot to that ROI topic.
Okay.
The behavior piece that you described is, okay, great. Values, but how does that translate into behaviors which are observable? And then it's clear whether people are honoring the values or not. And so in the case of the no asshole rule, some examples might be, let's change our interview process and specifically look for this and have our antennas up for that. Because if we see that, we don't want to hire. And having some rules of engagement that when people are on staff, if they do this, they get a warning because that violates the no assholes rule, etc. And I don't know if you have any additional input on that.
Yeah, I mean, I love this topic, so I'm going to try to maybe be a little more concise than I usually. I have an hour and 20 minutes, and I just get to talk to students, so I need to rein it in a little bit. I also write books and not blog posts. So I am not well designed. I'm not well trained for short format here. First of all, the observability is a big deal. And that's for individuals and organizations. I do this fun little exercise. I don't know if it's really landing so well here in Paris. I think it is. But when we talk about organizational culture and values and things like that, I give them a picture of this Western U.S. city with mountains. They actually don't see the mountains. They see a park, a golf course, mountains. And I say, this city has been described by their Chamber of Commerce as incredibly wholesome, family values. It's incredibly diverse, world-class shopping and restaurants. What is this? And they're like, I don't know, Scottsdale, Arizona. I've been to the U.S. a couple of times. What is this place? And it's actually Las Vegas. And all of these things are true, but I don't think a lot of us would associate Vegas as a place that has these wholesome values. And so, right. Which is not fair to the people that actually live in Vegas. So I want to be clear. But this is the battle we're also fighting in ourselves and with our organizations. What are the artifacts that people actually see?
Yeah. Oh my God. That is fascinating. And it is. It's the Strip is just one aspect of Vegas. And almost every local that I've ever met in Vegas says they never go to the Strip unless there's a particular restaurant in a resort that they want to go to, because there are some phenomenal restaurants on the Strip. But yeah, the rest of it is it's a lot of great residential neighborhoods, and Red Rocks National Park is freaking awesome. I rock climb in there. It's one of my very favorite places. In fact, it's funny that this is coming up because I'm making plans as we speak to go out to Red Rock shortly and do some climbing. So
I got it. And one other quick, or probably two quick rules of thumb that I use when I'm coaching, you've probably done the same, is we put these values, and they're kind of cute phrases, but I think the point gets across just the same. One is if you want to know your values, just show me your calendar and your pocketbook, and I'll tell you. And a different variation on that is, show me who you hire and you fire, and I'll tell you tell you what your values are. So these are cute little sayings, easy to remember, but they keep us on track, I think. And so, Yeah, we're together. We're aligned on this one.
Yep. Why I'm having you on the show, because
Yeah.
we get to shout, double about all the importance of all this. All right, so let's shift to the ROI, because it is a big challenge in leadership development. And, the people that do have the wallet are often, they don't see the ROI. And if they can't measure it, they don't see the value. So what are some ways that you work with clients to help justify the expense?
Yeah, I mean, part of it, well, there's a couple, when I think about learning and development, there's a couple of different things. And we have training, which just is like, let's help people acquire skills they need for the job right now. And then I typically distinguish that from development, which is more future focused things.
Yeah.
And there's a couple of different ways. First of all, I don't advise leaders or HR people or whoever to count participation in training programs as something that's related to ROI. It's
That's
not.
right.
So, and look, I love HR because it's such a mess. It's such a challenge, and there's so many things to study about it. But there's some really sharp people there, and they have such a difficult task tying it to ROI. So don't worry about participation. Even things like participant satisfaction in learning and development programs is a super crude indicator of success. I think what you're trying to do is understand the 2 or 3 big business priorities and make sure you can at least diagram how what you're doing addresses those. And so, like, you got to be thoughtful here. You need to, before you do any learning and development, you should ask, why are we doing it? Where are we now? And how are we going to measure success? So this is part of it. I also, and this might be sort of a hot take, it would drive the finance people crazy, but some learning and development is about the employee value proposition. It might not have a clear, in fact, I bet it won't have a clear impact on quarterly numbers and things like this. You can't just do a training and say 3 months from now, our return on assets is now up 11% higher than it was year over year. That's not going to happen.
Right.
But you might be seeing really subtle signs of, we're getting better talent in our applicant pool. We're holding on to people when the whole world around us looks like the sky's falling and things like this. So it's about thoughtfully tying the goals, but also being okay with some of this is not clearly tied to the P&L, at least in the short term, probably long term. But
yeah,
but it's keeping people in the fold. It's bringing you better talent. It's preparing you for the next time things go sideways.
Right. It's funny because you're right. It can be nebulous to measure, and very hard to tie to the P&L for sure. But I'm working with a few executives right now, and we are trying to find some measures for success that maybe aren't scientific but are trackable. So I'm working with a couple of folks on manager as coach or leader as coach.
Yeah.
I hear an ambulance out there. So it's like, okay, well, how do we measure whether or not you're being a coach? Well, okay, are you scheduling 10 minutes, for example, in those one-on-ones, which you're not canceling, to actually ask a couple of coaching questions?
Right.
Tick it off. Yes, I did.
It's simple. And taking stock of behaviors, asking subordinates if this is happening is really useful. I don't want to overdo engagement surveys at all. There's some use for them. I think they're overdone. What's the difference between a 92 and a 91 net promoter score? It's probably who cares.
Yeah.
But these tools, you can add questions to, you can figure out heat maps of where things look like they're going well and where they're not. These things give us some indication that behaviors are changing. So if you've got a thoughtful or even just a reasonable analytics function that can break down some of these data that you already have, it becomes pretty clear that you've got something. Let's see what else. I mean, there are certain functions where behaviors that you're measuring do line up with deliverables that you can observe. And so you can think about business development or sales and things like this, or even if you're You could look at error rates in some businesses. So,
That's right.
or
Yeah.
some parts of your business. So often we do have stuff that's pretty useful. It's business specific. The answer is almost always it depends. But really, you just need to make, if I see I'm speaking from the HR perspective here, which won't appeal to everyone, you have to make alliances with people that have this data. You have to have a clear logic and strategic, compelling reason for why you're doing certain things. And oftentimes, you can make a more persuasive case for why what you're doing adds value. And of course, this exercise is good to do beforehand. You'd be surprised, even in my own, like I teach this stuff, how many things I'm convinced will add value in my own life. And then if I would have done maybe 5 minutes of thoughtful work, I would have realized I'm just wasting my time here. Like there's no way this pans out in a way that makes me better or increases my paycheck or whatever the metric is that I care about.
Right. Yeah. And I'll just dovetail on this, which is like specifically for HR people who are listening. One thing that I've recommended to clients that, has been effective is take a pilot group, like identify one leader who really believes in people development and figure out what their pain point is. Run a program to address it, measure current state, set goals, and then measure the delta between, where things were and where things are. And then not only do you probably have some decent data, but you also have someone who's really prominent and well-respected in the organization to then lobby the people with the purse to be on your team.
Yeah, I really appreciate you jumping in to make that point. I kind of overlooked it, but we can use pre and post data. We can use pilot experience. If we have a big enough company, we can do A/B testing. There's all kinds of ways to make a more compelling case. So you're right.
Yeah.
Good point.
Cool. So those of you watching today, if you want to know some more about what's going on in Brad's head, let me give you the name of his 2 books. 3D Team Leadership, a new approach for complex teams. And the other one is Scaling for Success, People Priorities for High Growth Organizations. Where can people find those?
You can get them on Amazon.
Shocker!
Yeah, shocker. If you want to support the actual publisher, you can get them on Stanford University Press and Columbia University Press also. Nice.
I love it. Okay. Any last words of wisdom before we call this a show?
Well, I think one of the tensions we have in leadership that I tell all of my students, all the people I work with is we've got to communicate like we're on Twitter or social media in general. We've got to be really concise, but we have to think not like we're on Twitter. We have to realize the answer is always it depends, and there is totally room for us to engage in critical thinking to add value. So, a lot of times there are simple solutions, but don't get scared to, read more than one paragraph here. Life is about more than bullet points here. So embrace the complexity is where I'm going with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to just wrap up with a summary of some of the key points that I jotted down as we were speaking, to the extent some people didn't catch the entire thing today. So values, make sure they are actually real and not just platitudes. I love that word. And if they are, revisit them, make some new ones. And then that's not the end of the project. Figure out what behaviors you need to make official in your organization to demonstrate those values, and reward people who are following them and penalize people who are not, because that becomes the culture as defined by the behaviors. And when times are bad, as they seem to be now, we're not sure when things are going to get better. They will probably get worse before they get better. Please, please, please don't stop investing in your people. And realize, don't make assumptions. I love that Vegas example where people assume that, it's, it's, like a hot mess of, or a virtualless city, when in fact, the Strip is the exception, and it's a great place of family values and a lovely place to live. And lastly, be creative about ROI. It is measurable, just maybe not in the traditional sense. And we gave a lot of examples in our conversation. So, Dr. Brad, thank you so much for being on the show today.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. And have the best time in Paris. As I mentioned, I'm so jealous.
Yeah. Merci beaucoup.
Merci. All right, folks, until next time. Mwah.